Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tanya Odom, and I'm the Equity and Inclusion Program Director at the Walton Family Foundation. It's my pleasure to introduce our next session on building coalitions of the future. In the Foundation's work on K-12 education, the environment, and in our home region, we understand that those closest to the challenges are closest to finding the solutions. We have seen how engaged and empowered communities can be the catalyst for solving big problems more innovatively and sustainably. For change to really take root, people need to have a voice in deciding their future. And that means that they need the access with which to realize their vision. At the Foundation, we're committed to working to ensure that community voices are not only heard, but that people have a seat at the table to create and craft the solutions that will shape the trajectory of their lives. Systemic change can take decades, even generations, to realize. The hard work that gets us there must be innovative, inclusive, and guided by communities and done in an authentic and mutually trusting partnership with them. The coalitions of the future also need to be built across traditional lines, and they need to include different voices and divergent viewpoints, each bringing their own strengths to the table. That's how the whole becomes greater than the sum of its parts. It's what makes diversity and inclusion important, and important to the Foundation and our work. To learn more about these coalitions of the future and what they could look like, Olivia Walton will talk to two women who are working with people in their communities and ensuring they have the voice and agency to address the challenges that limit opportunity. But first, I'd like to introduce Arthur Brooks. Arthur is a professor at the Harvard Kennedy School and at the Harvard Business School. He served for 10 years as president of the American Enterprise Institute and is the author of 11 books, including the national bestseller, Love Your Enemies. Welcome, Arthur.
Thanks so much to the Walton Family Foundation for including me in this important forum, and thanks to Tanya for that gracious introduction. I want to talk to you today about disagreement. Now, my work as a social scientist is about love and happiness and agreement, generally speaking, but that doesn't mean that I'm all for agreement all the time. On the contrary, I love disagreement. I just don't like bad disagreement. And, I think we all agree that we have too much of that in this country together. We have polarization, we have paralysis, we have hatred, we have a culture of contempt. Why is that? Is that because we have too much disagreement? No, it's because we don't know how to disagree with each other constructively. What I want to argue for right now is that we don't need less disagreement in this country, we need better disagreement. First of all, let me tell you why I think disagreement is important. I think competition is important. I think competition brings excellence. In the economy, that's what we call capitalism. In politics, that's what we call democracy. Nobody wants uncontested elections or monopolies. We like competition. And the same thing is true of the competition of ideas. Look, iron sharpens iron. We need a competition of ideas to maintain a free society. We believe that. But what we're doing right now is not competition. It's really trying to tear each other down. It's kind of like trying to eviscerate the markets. It's trying to make it impossible for other people to participate. And that's not competition. That's not fair play. That's not what we want. What can each of us do to make a better competition of ideas, to disagree better? That's my topic. I think that those of us that are blessed with leadership positions, all of you who are watching, you can do a lot. You can model disagreement in a new way, and therefore we can have a new day in this country of good disagreement. But we have to follow a certain set of rules. Let me offer 4. Now, I've observed disagreement, I've written books on this topic, I've studied it for a long time as a social scientist, and the first thing I want to talk about is persuasion. There's, for hundreds of years now, one of the things that we've determined is that persuasion is superior to coercion. That people, if they come along voluntarily, they will do so joyfully. You'll have less conflict, you'll have less violence. The problem is in today's society, whether it's on the cancel culture on campuses or whether it's our brutal political culture, those things are trying to use force to get people to come along. That's going backwards to coercion. We don't want that. We want persuasion. So rule number one is always ask yourself when you're disagreeing, am I trying to coerce somebody into believing something, or am I trying to persuade? Now, if you give the right answer to that, you get rule number two, which is that you can't insult anybody into agreement. Nobody is ever persuaded by hate. It's an interesting set of studies that were put together by psychologists at Yale University in the late 1960s, a long time ago. And what they showed was that when two people are disagreeing on a particular matter, they did this among participants in the laboratory, human subjects, and one person becomes aggressive with the other. The person who is the victim of verbal aggression gets a harder stance in their views. In other words, if you insult somebody when you're disagreeing with them, it's like they're not just wrong, they're stupid and evil. That person will hold their views more forcefully. You've made a permanent opponent. Is that what you want? Obviously not. Why would you make a worse enemy? That's what happens when you try to insult your way into agreement. It won't happen. The great self-improvement author Dale Carnegie, who wrote How to Win Friends and Influence People, he wrote a little poem once that said, "A man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still." Isn't it the truth? Don't try to insult anybody into agreement. That's rule two. Rule three is stop assuming people's motives. This has become a national sport. Basically saying, I know what that person wants. I know what they really are all about. They're just in it for self-interest. And they try to question motives so that we can question credibility. Well, that's a mistake. Why? Number one, because it will create more bitter opposition. People don't like that. But second, it's usually wrong. A bunch of new studies that show that people on opposite sides of political disagreements, Democrats and Republicans, conservatives and liberals, they actually get a lot of facts wrong about each other, about how much money the other side makes and about the opinions that the other side typically holds. If we can't even get the facts right, you think you can get the motives right? No. Don't assume motives. It's a weak form of argumentation, and you'll show to the other side that you don't know as much as you say you do. It's a losing strategy. And finally, and as important as anything else, use your values as a gift, not as a weapon. We have a tendency in the public sphere to take our strongly felt opinions and beat people over the head with them. You know? You see this all the time, from gun control to abortion to education policy and everything in between. We use these ideas that we have, our values, as a weapon. That's a counterproductive strategy, isn't it? It's like, ringing somebody's doorbell with a bouquet of flowers when they open the door, smacking them across the face with the flowers. Beautiful flowers just became a tool of assault. You don't want that. I mean, I don't think you want that. I certainly don't want that. So think to yourself, how am I being perceived? Am I aggressive with my own values, thus vitiating the moral content of those values? That's an avoidable error if we think about it in advance. So what are the 4 rules of disagreeing better? Let's go over them one more time. Number 1, persuade, don't coerce. Number 2, don't try to insult people into agreement. Number 3, don't question people's motives or assume anything about their motives. And number 4, use your values as a gift, not as a weapon. If you follow those rules, if I follow these rules, if we do it together, it's a new day. We can change the country. We can show people how it's done. Disagreeing better, competition of ideas, a flourishing society in which we coexist despite our differences. No, because of our differences. Our differences become our strength. Let's do that together. That's the country we deserve. It's the country we need. And it's the country I know you are dedicated to. Well, now let's move on, and I want to pass the agenda over to Olivia Walton, who's going to have a conversation with 2 people that are really trying to bring our country together by lifting up our communities, making America a better place. Over to Olivia, and thank you so much.
Hi, and thank you all for joining us again today. I'm going to be speaking with 2 leaders who are making transformative change in their communities. Being guided by the voices and needs of communities is so important to us here at the Walton Family Foundation. We believe that that means supporting efforts to advance solutions that are community-driven, community-demanded, and community-led, because those are the ones that will deliver the most meaningful change and lasting progress. So today I'm going to be speaking with two women who are leaders that are really living and breathing this work. First up, I'm delighted to be joined by Emma Robbins. Emma is the director of the Navajo Water Project at Dig Deep Water, a human rights nonprofit that works to provide Americans with clean running water. The families she serves are some of the most vulnerable to COVID-19, often because they lack access to clean water simply to wash their hands, or they need to break social distancing to haul water for their families. In her work, Emma has specific experience with making community-led change. Welcome, Emma. It's great to see you.
Hi, Olivia. Thank you for having me.
Now, Emma, I was just shocked when I read these numbers. I did not realize, I don't think many people do, that nearly 30% of Navajo homes are without running water. Can you start by maybe just talking a little bit about some of the reasons why so many Navajo lack access to such a basic need?
Super important question. So there are several reasons. One, we live on a sovereign nation, or the Navajo Nation, which is the largest reservation in the United States. There is also a lack of funding, both federal, from the tribal government, state and county governments, to install water lines. People live very far out traditionally. So, I mentioned we're a huge nation. If we were a state, we would actually be the 10th largest. And people live very far spread out from each other. So oftentimes it's very, very, very pricey to put in water lines. In addition to that, our nation, very unfortunately, is riddled with uranium mines, and that makes a lot of the drinking water unsafe.
And that's shocking. I really couldn't believe it. So the Navajo tribal community is kind of at the border of Utah and Arizona, right, where you're doing this work. But before you could even get involved in the nuts and bolts of working on this issue, you had to get the community to really trust you and believe that you were really there to help. How did you do that?
Yeah, exactly. We're in 3 different states, so Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico. And I myself am from the Navajo Nation. I myself am Diné, and I am from the western part of the res. And so in a lot of the project sites that we work at, there are often hours between us. People say to me, well, you're from the reservation, so you must have a connection there, which I do. But the thing is, we're so many different communities. And as I mentioned, being so far spread out, we have our own cultures, our own way of speaking in our language. And oftentimes it really takes years for me to embed myself and also our team. So what we generally do is start out with an introduction to our project partners and to the community members, and make sure that we understand what their needs are. That way we're not just jumping in and taking these solutions that may have worked in one community and implementing them in another. It's really important that we're listening to what people need, and not only are we being consentful, but we're actually being collaborative and building these projects alongside people, so we're not imposing something that isn't going to work for them.
It's so important. Is there a particular family or families that stand out from your work?
I love working with families that have elders in them specifically. Elders are the keeper of our language, of our culture, and of our traditions. And so any family that has an elder in it is always very special to me. In Navajo Mountain, I think, it's one of the biggest communities that are in need. And there's actually a family of the Setons, and they have a grandma who's about 94 years old. And last summer, in 2019, she got running water for the first time. And it was just really special because there was so many multi-generational household members, people ranging from ages 5 to 94. And it was just such a big change to see that.
That's wonderful. You of course, you're focused on listening, which is so key to, community-driven change. But it occurred to me, before you can listen, you've really got to get people to talk. So what else did you do, or what do you think people need to do to really earn that trust?
It takes a lot, you know. It ranges from things like embedding ourselves in community festivals, events, hosting dinners, making smaller movements before we start our larger projects. So doing things like, I guess handing out water barrels or purchasing the water trucks and showing people that we're serious and that we're not just another solution that's going to come in and leave in several years. And, very importantly, not have an operation and maintenance plan. A really important part of my job is making sure that we are run by Diné people, for Diné people. We have a staff of almost 20, and 18 of us are Native, 17 of us are from the reservation. We have really great allies who are non-Native, and making sure that we're hiring people from the community and showing, not only are we creating jobs, but we're bringing people in who know what people need in this space.
Of course, so many of the tribal communities have a tragic history of being misled, and so I imagine trust was really hard to overcome. How did you work to build that?
Yeah, it's something that I'm still working on every day. Again, even as a Navajo, I struggle with that because people will say, well, you're from Tuba City and you're from a larger community and you personally know what it's like to have running water or electricity. And the way that I often communicate my story is that, that may be true, but most of my family members did not have running water and most of them still don't. And it's something where once you start to listen to them and once you start to share your story, things really get off the ground there. It's really important that we just actually do that. And it's just listening to people and making sure that, again, we're not coming in and imposing something that might have worked in another community, but it's not necessarily going to work here.
So I know you've said listening a couple times, and I guess it's because we can't overstate the importance, but I'm going to sort of go at the question a little bit different way, because we've got grantees watching today from all over the country, and I think they're probably trying to figure out what's the secret sauce to making community-based change really successful. Is there anything besides listening that you would say?
That's a great question. In addition to listening, it's important to learn things that are the very base of the problems with Native nations. And those include things like treaties. So really studying up on treaties that were made between the federal government and different tribes throughout the United States, and knowing what they say, because a large part of why tribes don't have infrastructure is because these treaties have been broken. In addition to that, it's really important for everybody across the United States to know whose land they're living on. And there are many great websites out there where you can find out whose land you're occupying. And just learning those two base building blocks will make a huge difference. I think also making it a priority when you're voting or even when you're reading the news to tune into what's going on Native nations, because they're very serious things. As you mentioned, 30% of Navajos on the reservation don't have access to running water, and that's an injustice in the US. And as the first peoples of this land, it's important that we're treated equally, and it's really important to just start learning at those basic levels.
Emma, there's still so much more work to be done. When you look out at the next 5 years, what gives you hope?
What gives me hope is what we've seen during COVID. COVID has highlighted the problems that existed. These are issues that are 24/7, 365. But seeing everybody on the Navajo Nation and our allies and our accomplices come together and say, now's the time that we need to implement solutions, not only during the pandemic, but moving forward as well, has really given me hope. It makes me a little sad that it took a pandemic to make this happen, but I just feel a lot more inspired working alongside all of these people who want to make sure that different communities on tribal nations or in other areas have things like running water, electricity, and internet connectivity, which is obviously important in the 21st century.
Emma, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. You take care.
All right, so we're now going to go over to Washington to talk to Maya Martin Cadogan about a group of parents who came together to form a high-quality local school. Maya, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Olivia.
All right, so Maya, I'm told you are a proud fifth generation Washingtonian, and you are the founder, of course, of PAVE, which stands for Parents Amplifying Voices in Education. PAVE is dedicated to creating an environment where the vision for education is created with children and families, not for them. So Maya, tell me about this fabulous school. How did it come together? What was it exactly? Who are these parents, and what was it that they wanted?
Yeah, so in 2016, the base in Anacostia, DC, which is east of the Anacostia River, so it's Joint Base Anacostia Bowling, which is a Naval and Air Force base, had never had a school on the base. And so many of the families there were traveling all the way across the city to go to schools all around. And many of the kids were on buses for 45 minutes to an hour. At the same time, you had families in Ward 8 who had never been on the base, even though they had lived in Ward 8 their entire lives, and the base takes up many miles inside of the ward. And so when they approached us about identifying a school to come and open on the base that would be both for military families and Ward 8 families, we were really excited to bring together families themselves to identify what school they wanted to see. And so what you had happen was there were 4 moms from the base who joined in together with 4 moms and dads from the Ward 8 community in order to form the Ward 8 Parent Operator Selection Team. And they actually met for 6 months, every other Saturday, for 4 hours at a time, in order to identify the school, 1, the RFP that they wanted for a school to come to the base, and 2, the actual school that they wanted to see come and really serve their children and serve both communities. This is an interesting process where you had 4 white moms from the military and 3 black dads and a black mother from Ward 8 coming together and saying, we want to come together and figure out what's best for all of our children. And one of the things I think they really realized in that process is that they wanted the same kind of high quality schools. And the question was, how are we going to make that happen? And they were the ones that selected that operator, which was the first of its kind, where families were actually at the center, not just of what kind of school that they wanted to see, but they made the selection for that school that then got approved to open in this upcoming fall.
That's really exciting. So the military is sort of an unexpected partner, perhaps, for educators. Tell me about that partnership. What was it like working with the military?
What was amazing is I had never worked with the military before in my life. And I had never actually been on the base myself. I had lived in Ward 8 for a few years and had never, and as you said, I'm a multi-generational Washingtonian, and I had never been on the base. And it was amazing to see the kind of community that they had there and the way in which the military was really interested not just in creating a school for its own students, but creating a school that could be a center point of the community and for all kids. And so what was amazing and beautiful was that the military opened themselves to say, we're going to give you this piece of land and a long-term lease at very little cost to you so that you can create a school that can be a really great option for both families in the Ward 8 community and families in the military. And so we're really excited that they actually just signed that lease this past week with the general rep on the base. And so the school will be opening in the next fall. So we're really excited about that.
That's great. So as I was saying, I think, some people might be daunted to work, they think we're working with school children. Oh, that seems like a big bureaucratic system. How did you feel that those systems responded to the parents?
Yeah, I think one of the things that was really amazing is that when the military first approached us about the piece of land, they were saying for us as leaders in the city to select what school that would be. And as soon as we said, actually let the parents choose, they were completely open to that. And I think it's one of those things that we don't think systems are open that way to families and communities really being not just a part of the process, but the decision makers. And what we learned in this process is if you just ask, and if you create a process where families actually can come together, where they can get all the information, because we brought in trainers to talk to them about everything from testing and building school culture and building diverse communities to doing operations and finance. Our families that were a part of the post learned all of those pieces in order to be able to select that operator. And what made that so powerful was that then when that operator got selected and had to apply for a charter through our public charter school board, which is our authorizer, they got approved by unanimously by every single member of that board. And that was because parents had already done the work, and their process mirrored the process that the charter authorizer does. And so I think it was just an amazing and beautiful example of when you actually put power in the hands of families and communities, the amazing things that they can do and the way that they can inspire systems to really think and center themselves on what it is that families and communities want can be powerful. But oftentimes we just don't even ask. And so this was a perfect example of when you ask and then you do the work, what can be the outcome for kids and families.
So we have hundreds of grantees from all over the country watching this right now, and I think some of them might be wondering whether or not they could kind of, lead this kind of effort with local people in their community to lift those community voices. What do you do, though, when those voices don't agree with one another? How do you lead a group of parents when they have kind of, diverse opinions on how to move forward?
Yeah, we experienced that kind of challenge in terms of people having different opinions or thinking that they have different opinions when we started the Ward 8 Post. The 4 white moms from the base were oftentimes, when they talked about our kids, talking about the kids that were military and talking about the kids that were living on the base. And then the 3 black dads and the black mom that were from the Ward 8 community, when they talked about our kids in the beginning, they were oftentimes talking about black children from Ward 8. And one of the things that we did was immediately we started saying, we actually think they want the same things for their children. They might not know that because they've never built relationship with each other, but it's important to center in those relationships. So we paired the military parents up with a Ward 8 parent and the Ward 8 parents up with military parents, and we had them do an activity where they each imagined what a high quality school looked like for all of them. And one of the things they said right after that was, we actually all want the same thing in that high quality school. And so it was such a great moment for them to realize we're actually not talking about different things when we say we want a great school. We're talking about the same things. We want high quality teachers. We want to make sure that family voice is centered in the school building. We want to make sure that kids are getting the greatest curriculum and instruction that they can. We want to make sure they have out of school time programs. We want to make sure that somebody understands that many of our kids are transient, whether or not those are military families who are getting different orders every couple years, or many of our Ward 8 families, because of the challenges of poverty and gentrification in our city, are oftentimes moving. And so we saw this group of parents who thought they were from such disparate worlds come together and realize we actually have a lot more in common than we thought we did. But you have to do that intentionally when you're doing that work. And you do that by centering in what is it that you want for your child. When you ask parents what they want for kids, doesn't matter, rich or poor, black or white, what they want for their children is oftentimes the same in terms of what they want that comes out of their passions, that is about how they're able to succeed post graduation and secondary school. And that is always the same. And so I think it was about really bringing them together to allow themselves to see we want the same things for our kids and we can be united in this. And so by the end of the project, when they said our kids, they were actually talking about all the kids in Ward 8 and in the military. And that was a beautiful sight to see.
That's such a great point. What kind of surprises came up for you in this process, either good or bad?
Yeah, I think one of the things that was surprising was how much parents said that they learned from this process that helped them in serving their own children. The parents of the Post, by and large, will never be able to send their kids to the school that will be opening, which is the Learn Public Charter School of DC. And the reason for that is that this has been 5 years in the making, right? They knew when they started this process that the school wouldn't necessarily open. Some of them had kids in middle school, and the school is now serving pre-K through 8th grade because they identified those were the grades that were most needed, because they actually surveyed their community on the base and in Ward 8. And they asked, what kind of school would you like to see? And so one of the things that surprised us is that parents actually said, even though this isn't going to serve my child in particular, because I know that I might have gotten different orders, or by that time my child will have graduated from those grade levels, what's been critical for me is I didn't even know how things like NWA MAP, which is testing that we do every year with our students, worked. And so they were like, I learned so much that has helped me in serving my child around what makes a school successful. How do I know how kids are doing in that school? How do I know what the culture looks like in that building? We brought in even school leaders who had started diverse schools racially and socioeconomically to talk to them about what were the critical components that you had to think about when you were building that kind of community. And that was just for them so powerful in a positive way that I think they learned that then serve them in helping and raising their own children. I think that, in the ways that it was a little hard, it's how long this process has been more than we anticipated. We knew that this was going to take some time, but whenever you're working on things like leases, having built buildings myself when I was a school leader myself, I knew that this was going to be a challenge, that financing for new schools is no easy feat. But when you're financing for a new school with land that is owned by the federal government on a military base, that is multiple levels of challenge. And so we really had to work through that. I think what's been powerful inside of that, though, is the Learn team is great. They had already operated a school in a military installation in outside of Chicago, and we had a great executive director. I'm the board chair of the school, and one of our parent leaders who was on the Ward 8 post is actually on our board. And so there was this consistency of understanding, what do we think is most important to keep true, even as the parcel of land has changed and shifted over time. And so we're excited to finally see that school come to be in the fall for kids.
All right, well, we will be cheering you on. My one last question for grantees who are watching, what advice would you have for those trying to create the success that you've achieved?
Yeah, I think the most important thing that I have learned out of this process is let parents lead. I think many times when we talk about families and parent power, we are talking about the power that we put into bounds with boundaries. And I actually think it's really important that we give families full power. I made no decision about what school would come to the base in this process, even as the executive director of the organization that was bringing families together. That we put in the hands of families. Even the setup that we had in that room during all of those decisions, I didn't even sit at the table with them. We had them sit at a conference room table themselves so that they could have those conversations, and all the rest of us who were supporting on the project sat around the edges. There are even ways in which we construct power that we forget about that makes people feel like they do or do not own the project. And so I think the most important thing is really let them own it, really let them lead it, and really give them that power so that then they can transform the system in ways that we never anticipated or imagined.
All right, Maya, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Really excited for your school to open in DC this coming fall. Thanks for the time.
Thank you so much, Olivia.
All right, so that wraps up our two great conversations on community-led change. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to my father-in-law, Jim, who is also the world's best granddad. Jim?
Thank you, Olivia. Hi, I'm Jim Walton. I want to thank each of you for spending a few hours with us again today. We know how valuable your time is. My parents started the foundation almost 34 years ago because they wanted to help create access to opportunity for people and communities. That belief still guides our work today. And they envisioned multi-generational change at the heart of what we do at the foundation. The change our world needs is too big for any one generation to carry. It was so inspiring to hear from young advocates today because we know we are stronger when experienced leaders learn from young leaders who bring fresh thinking, new ideas that are necessary to solve big problems. Powerful change happens when we listen to each other. A lot has changed over the years. The foundation has grown, and so have our friendships and partnerships with all of you. As we move forward in a changing world, we're dedicated to unlocking what opportunity means today and removing the barriers that stand in the way of success. To do that, we must increase our focus on bringing people together. We must be bold in our thinking about what's possible. That's how we'll get more innovative schools, healthier rivers and oceans, and vibrant, inclusive communities where everyone has access to a better quality of life. Arthur Brooks offered some wise advice about how we can bridge our divides by finding better ways to disagree better. Our problems will never get solved by insults or questioning others' motives. A great idea can come from anywhere. When diverse viewpoints are represented, the result is collaboration and innovation. We need everyone's ideas if we want to build new coalitions to make change that lasts. The problems we face today are more complex and interconnected than ever. So it's more important than ever that foundations focus on bringing everyone to the table. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about how we can turn ideas into action and move forward together. What change do you hope to see in the next 5 years? If you haven't already done so, I encourage you to share your hopes with us by recording a short 30-second video. You can find out the details of how to submit your video on the event website. We'll be showing some of those at the end of the conference. Once again, thank you for being a part of this experience. We're excited to work with you in our next chapter.